David Rockefeller, the banker and philanthropist with the fabled family name who controlled Chase Manhattan Bank for more than a decade and wielded vast influence around the world for even longer as he spread the gospel of American capitalism, died on Monday morning at his home in Pocantico Hills, New York. He was 101. A family spokesman, Fraser PCI Tell, confirmed the death. Chase Manhattan had long been known as the Rockefeller Bank, although the family never owned more than 5% of its shares. But Mr. Rockefeller was more than a steward. As chairman and chief executive throughout the 1970s, he made it David's Bank, as many called it, expanding its operations internationally.
However, the very innovations that are making possible dramatic improvements in human well-being are also creating new problems.
His stature was greater than any corporate title might convey, however. His influence was felt in Washington and foreign capitals, in the corridors of New York City government, in art museums, in great universities and in public schools. Mr. Rockefeller could well be the last of a less and less visible family to have cut so imposing a figure on the world stage. As a peripatetic advocate of the economic interests of the United States and of his own bank, he was a force in global financial affairs and in his country's foreign policy. He was received in foreign capitals with the honors accorded a chief of state. He was the last surviving grandson of John D. Rockefeller, the tycoon who founded the Standard Oil Company in the 19th century and built a fortune that made him America's first billionaire and his family one of the richest and most powerful in the nation's history. As an heir to that legacy, David Rockefeller lived all his life in baronial splendor and privilege. Whether in Manhattan, when he was a boy, he and his brothers would roller skate along Fifth Avenue trailed by a limousine in case they grew tired, or at his magnificent country estates. Imbued with the understated manners of the East Coast elite, he loomed large in the upper reaches of a New York social world of glittering black tie galas. His philanthropy was monumental, and so was his art collection, a museum-like repository of some 15,000 pieces. Many of them masterpieces, some lining the walls of his office's 56 floors above the streets at Rockefeller Center, to which he repaired, robust and active, well into his 90s. In silent testimony to his power and reach was his Rolodex, a catalogue of some 150,000 names of people he had met as a banker statesman. It required a room of its own beside his office. Spread out below that corporate eyrie was a city he loved and influenced mightily. He was instrumental in rallying the private sector to help resolve New York City's fiscal crisis in the mid-1970s. As chairman of the Museum of Modern Art for many years, his mother had helped found it in 1929. He led an effort to encourage corporations to buy and display art in their office buildings and to subsidize local museums. And as chairman of the New York City Partnership, a coalition of business executives, he fostered innovation in public schools and the development of thousands of apartments for lower-income and middle-class families. He was always aware of the mystique surrounding the Rockefeller name. "I have never found it a hindrance," he once said with typical reserve. "Obviously, there are times when I'm aware that I'm treated differently. There's no question that having financial resources, which, thanks to my parents, I learned to use with some restraint and discretion, is a big advantage.